You there, Johnny, for a minute.
Hello, everybody. We're just chuckling. We got Johnny Esquivel in the house tonight. He doesn't make it all that often. It's always good to hear from him, and he's crinkling away and stuff in his face. So I'm Nate Adams. Welcome to the HVAC 2.0 show. Joined here by a bunch of the guild, and you'll notice from my background, I am not in the usual place, and Ken actually is in my usual place. Ken's staying at our house working on one of our other ones. We got Tanner down in beautiful Mississippi.
Huh? Don't insult me like that.
Huh?
Mr. Reedie Ward, beautiful North Carolina. He is our gentlest soul here, and the bull in the china shop himself, Mr. Johnny Esquivel, down in Austin, Texas. So tonight is another open mat. Like I said, this is probably going to become a pretty standard format because we have, honestly, this brain trust here, and it seems horrible to not take really good advantage of that. And there's Mr. Jeff Howard popping in from beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana. So we're just going to be having a fairly open discussion. I threw a couple of slides in here from various trainings that I've created, but in general, we're just going to have a discussion as we go. So I'm actually just going to blow past this really quickly, but a couple of years ago, I mentioned that we could skew load calcs as much as plus or minus 70% with infiltration alone, lower door alone. And that caused a little bit of an uproar, which Tanner may have had a little bit of a factor in stoking that fire.
Yeah, it may have pissed in a few people's Cheerios, but hey, sometimes it's needed.
I'd go so far as to say it was a kerfuffle.
That is a word we need to use more often. There's some of these beautiful older words that just don't get used that much. Kerfuffle is such a good one. Anyway, I ran some numbers on it it was actually a friend of Ted's, his house, and we found out that his actual load by watching runtime was 1.5 tons at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. But the load calc came in, depending which way you ran it, but at a rate that we've seen came in at 70,000. So that's a pretty broad range, 18 to 70,000. What's the right size piece of equipment for that house? Hell if I know, without knowing some more.
Certainly don't know without a blower door test on that one.
Yeah, no idea. It turned out to be crazy tight. He got that thing down to like 500 or 600 CFM 50. It was really, really tight for a retrofit. That's about as good as it gets. Then something else we've noticed is leaky houses, when it gets really cold outside, they tend to have their load go vertical, where if you've got a fairly tight house, they go at a pretty gentle slope. So kind of what we're talking about here is, if you don't know a few extra pieces of information, being quote unquote accurate on a load calc, which would everybody agree that plus or minus 0.5 ton or so is probably accurate?
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah. Like at what level do we start getting to where we're inaccurate?
1.5 tons? Ton one way or the other, as opposed to 0.5 ton either way?
Yeah, when you start getting over 1 ton, I mean, depending on the house and the conditions, I mean, you could run into some problems.
Yeah.
That way.
I mean, what does manual S look for? Johnny, you're going to know that one. You run plenty of loads. How far out are you allowed to be with a manual S?
Don't hold me to this, but I believe it's at different levels. I know a single stage is around 10%, two stage around 20s, and I think variable capacity, you can have a much more larger gap on there. Again, you got to go to the books. It's just right off the top of my head. I can't say exactly, but you get a little bit more sway with variable capacity. But that puts other problems into play. You can sentence that units to run on low stage forever, and that causes a list of a bunch of other problems.
Yep. Yeah, you get unhappy equipment in other weird ways that way. So, no, I mean, there you go. 10%. That is, on a 3-ton, 3,600 BTUs. That's a quarter ton, give or take, not a half a ton. So that's what we're supposed to be doing to it. So if you are off by more than that, what does that mean? So, Reedie, what was the load that you ran first on your house?
The first load I ever ran, just with blower door and manual J, it was 42,000. It was just at 42,000 BTUs.
And what did you find through watching runtime?
I think it was 1.6, 1.7 tons.
Wow.
Oh.
So like 20,000 BTUs?
Yeah.
Now, is that heating or cooling?
That was cooling. The heating was just a bit more. It was in the 30s, low 30s. I don't remember that much. Here's what I do know. I turned my heat strips off until 17 degrees, and my heat pump did it.
There you go.
So
and you have a 3-ton, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So load came in at 3.5, and 3 more than did it for that.
Yeah.
And that's, but I mean, so the cooling, was that the 42 or was that the heating?
Hang on a second. 17 degrees.
Yeah.
What's your design temperature?
21.
Okay. So find a 17 and 21's design.
Yeah. 42 was for cooling from the manual J.
Okay.
Gotcha.
What
And
was
I put
heating? Do
blower
you
door
remember?
in there too.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, oftentimes that helps some, but that
Yeah.
didn't help enough. Do you remember what the heating was?
No, I'd have to go back. I mean, I
Didn't care.
Didn't care. Here's what they had in the house: 5 tons. So that didn't work too good.
That was the wrong size. So if we're supposed to be at a single stage plus or minus, 10%, that's pretty tight. And you were off a little more than that. You were off by 100.
Yeah.
Just a smidge, only off by 10 times what we're supposed to be off. Small details. But who cares?
But just go ahead and follow your manual J, because that's perfect and there's nothing else that you need, and you'll have it right on the money every single time. Isn't that right, Aka?
Yeah.
Reedie also had that great story of the lawsuit over bad sizing. What did the load calcs come in again at?
Oh boy, I mean, we did one. They had an engineer do one, and they had another heating and air conditioning company do one, and they came anywhere from 2 tons up to 4 tons. And what we did, is manual J. We had like 40,000 BTUs. We put in 3.5 tons. And the best news that we could ever hear when we did the load calculation is that, and everybody else did when they were all manual J's. The best news we could ever hear is case closed. Nobody really can tell anything about what's happening here. That was from the state board, that said that. And so they said, we find you did nothing wrong and let us go.
Yeah.
You were right in the middle.
Yeah.
So what was the outcome to the customer, though? Why were they complaining?
Because they wanted us to pay their electric bills for 8 years. And, they had that was back before I knew anything about blower doors. We had offered, after we found out, we had offered to go back and do blower door testing. We'd offered, but by this time it was someone who saw some weakness and wanted to try and exploit it and go after anybody they could.
So they had
when
high
there are
energy bills and they thought they were too high.
Yeah. And they wanted us to pay them for, like I say, 8 years. They wanted
Like
us
it
to
would have
pay their
mattered
bills.
having different size equipment.
The only way it would have mattered is if it was good equipment, real good, smaller equipment. But
Hmm.
best news in the world was when they said, we find you've done no fault. And as far as we're concerned, there's not going to be any more action taken on this. Because we offered, we truly offered.
Yeah, it's tricky. So great comment from Jason Trammell here. Man, Jay has so many fudge factors built in, but it still comes in less than what they have now fairly often.
Yeah.
But
It just goes to
then,
show how oversized equipment is.
yeah, right? Because you can oftentimes cut that in half, at least for heating, and still be okay. For cooling, usually you don't get the half. So Reedie is kind of an extreme case for what I normally see. Normally I see you can discount 20 or 30%. And then some things do get complicated. Like we were talking to Jonny before the show. So John, what is your design temperature there in Austin again?
So, let me get a little dark in here. Promise I'm not in a cave. Actual work van. But our design temperatures, we have two of them. We have one that's by our airport, and I believe that is 98 degrees. And then we have that's more closer in town, that's 96 degrees. They do that at the Camp Mayberry at the military base. So,
And what happened this summer?
So in the summer, we've been having 3 years that we've been getting more than 60 days of 100-degree weather. And this year is really bad.
60 days straight.
60 days, even a little more than that. And then it gets into like the 109s, 105s. And so it's so much higher than the daily degree delta that they're giving us for code to use. And it's caused some problems where our thermostat will shift. It'll go from a 98-degree day holding 75 degrees. And then when it gets up to 105, it can easily get up to 78, 80 degrees in the house. And so homeowners, it's kind of hard to tell them that, like, hey, sorry, I did this to code and you're stuck with it. So I kind of took a step back and said, okay, how do I use the manual S and then give the homeowner an option so I can responsibly avoid responsibility, and that's been working a little better. It's helped me get out of jams.
How are you doing that, by the way?
So what I'll do is I'll say, hey, we're going to do a design to the manual J. And speaking of the manual J, we got to do all the manuals, because if you're just doing one, it's not getting you there. And I've been learning that through my travels. And when I talk to the homeowner, I'm like, hey, if we, put all the building specifications in, we line up the right equipment, we line up the right ductwork, and we line up the right grills, are you going to have a problem if your temperature gets above 75 degrees? And then if they say yes, I normally ask them, what temperature do they like keeping it at? And then I will place scenarios on the manual J to put their temperature in, and then put the highest temperature I think it's going to be around. The highest temperature we had was 109 degrees from the hours of, I think, 3 to 6, something like that. And I kind of calculated in there what my peak times were. And then I ran it through the manual S. And again, don't hold me to the numbers, but I look at how far I can go above on percentage. So I think around 20% for the variable and 2-stage. And then I'll bring it back to them and I'll let the homeowner make that decision instead of me, as long as I stay in the range. Does that make sense on what I said?
Let me see if I got it right. What you're saying is, if they want to be safer, they have to get better equipment.
Yes, in a nutshell.
So it would almost be another line in or another column or two in the free quote report showing this equipment is good to 110 degrees. This equipment's good to 112 degrees. This equipment's good to 115 degrees or something like that.
More like I'll do like 72 degrees at 105 degree day. Because usually on the manual S, it'll do like 95 and 105. Some 85, 95, and 105. So
okay.
Parameters in the manual S so I can actually have true data. and then I'll put it on a spreadsheet. And then from there, I can look at the actual equipment and how it's going to perform. And I'm really looking at the sensible of how it's going to move that thermostat. You know, and if I'm at 115% variable capacity, I'll roll with it. 120, I'll roll with it. Anything over that, then I'm going to really start questioning what I got to do. Or if the homeowner can do something else. Like, can the homeowner, instead of doing 7.5 inches of open cell, can they do something better with closed cell? Or can they really hit their infiltration scores to be at, they in the building industry, they love using ACH. So I hate using that, but just so they can giggle. And I know, well, actually, for us, I won't use it. But let's say a 2,000 square foot house, I'm going to tell them, hey, you know what? Let's see. I would like you to be somewhere around 600 CFM 50, you know, somewhere right around there. About what is that? About 0.2 CFM per 1 square foot, something of that nature. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you give them a target for blower door for leakage.
I'll look at different ways how we can improve it without going if my equipment won't do it. And I kind of just give them a range so they can see what it at. But just like Ted said, hey, you can have a choice on these really hot temperatures, but we also got to worry about what happens when this unit gets stuck on low stage for 80% of the year. They will need to have to backdoor it with a dehu. And in Austin, Texas, it's a no-brainer. You have to have a dehu in Austin, Texas. You just have to.
Sort of like where Nate lives.
Yeah.
Not right now. I didn't check the dew point, but it's probably in the 20s.
You're probably okay where you are right now.
Yeah, but where Ken's sitting at my dining room table,
I'll look it up.
it's weird. Man, although it was in the 40s today, so nighttime temperature is basically what controls your dew points.
Yeah.
But Jonny, thanks for just kind of filling us in on how you handle that, because that is going to be challenging as some climates end up seeing pretty high temperatures. I mean, a huge swath of the U.S. saw upwards of 100 degrees this summer, which that doesn't happen much. I mean, I remember I think the summer of '88, it got to 100 degrees. It was really dry, and it pushed way high in the Cleveland area. It was a drought because if it's humid out, it's difficult to have enough energy in the atmosphere to break about 95. I mean, Miami kind of breaks my brain because you think of Miami as really hot. Their design temperature is like 94, 93. Cleveland design temperature is 89. It's not like it's that different. But their heating design temp is like 53. Like, what heating? We don't need that. It does crack me up though, when people are like, oh, but you don't need heat pumps there. Like, why not? That's all you need. You don't need strip heat there. I'm like, what's the point of being resistant?
Wait, what?
It's man, you get COP of like 4.
Somebody on LinkedIn was acting like I'm in Florida. It's different here. Everything, you don't know what Florida's like.
But you know, like when I just to think about it too, you know, I think what really got me out of the jam and like what made me start doing that is I used to take control of the whole job and put the cape on my back. Like, this is the way you do it, and you're going to do it my way, you know, because I'm going to go balls out and I'm going to get this tight as I can. And when I learned to talk to the homeowner and give them a choice, I mean, put the bumper guards up for sure, you know. But
help them, but don't own their choices.
Yeah, and that's why I've been doing it, because, you know, 2 years ago, you know, you usually see how it unfolds, and that was the only thing. They're like, John, I wish you would have gave me the option to make my house comfortable when it gets, you know, over 100, you know, all the time for 60 days, you know, straight.
Yeah, me too. I wish I had a crystal ball.
Yeah, you know,
right.
But what was good about that with learnings and the teachings y'all gave me, the homeowners ended up buying a bigger unit on their own instead of complaining to me saying the unit's not keeping up. So I thought that was a pretty good way to do it, when I responsibly avoid responsibility and let them know, you know, like, hey, I gave them a choice to get better equipment, and they didn't pick it. So they assumed that responsibility on it. So I was like, all right, that worked out.
So did they buy another piece of equipment from you?
Yep. Out of like the 15
Whoa.
jobs, I did 2 of them. We had to upsize it.
Wow.
And
But you got paid for the upsize?
I
Nope.
would say
Nope.
I would say he did.
Sounds that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we lost him there.
Yeah.
So he's calling in from the truck. Is this where we say bless his heart? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good thing you're
Hard.
pretty.
So are we going to talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So just trying to fill in some stories of like the uncertainty that you have. So this comes from some training that I did on sizing HVAC. So we think a lot in spectrums within HVAC 2.0. What's the bottom ends that it could be? What's the high end that it could be? And then you start working from that backwards into where on the spectrum are you on this problem with this house with this client.
Load range instead of load calc.
Yes. Yeah. So one thing that
Range.
drives me crazy is if you run a man J and it comes in like to a BTU. So say it's 56,353. That doesn't mean that's your actual load. It could be anywhere between 25 and 75. If you don't have
Even
some
if
other
there was a
information.
really tight load calc, it's still 50 to 60.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, at a minimum, you're plus or minus, a couple thousand, 5,000.
There's
8,000
some
BTU.
assumptions that you've made in there that are either high assumptions or low assumptions.
Yeah.
And nobody's done a perfect load calc. They got
No,
the solar exposure wrong, or who knows.
The sad part is there is no truly perfect load calc. The closest thing to perfection you get is to watch equipment runtime on a design day, because that's no longer a calculation, that's reality. But that's going to move around too. Because like if we get a really cold day this time of year, everything else is still warm. The ground's still warm. But I remember in November, I don't know, 4 years ago, because we didn't have the water working at our Ohio house yet. And we had just put all of the lines, they were just laying on the ground going to the new well, and everything froze. And I called the well guy and I'm like, all right, we're going to need to get this underground. But it was like November 6th or something like that. And we got a 10-degree cold snap. So everything was still warm. So when all the building materials and the earth are still warm, your load isn't as high. Where after you go through a month or two of a fairly cold winter, your load's going to be higher because everything is cold.
And you may have a brick house, or you may have a stick house.
Yeah, and I mean brick has this crazy thermal mass, so they take forever to really get cold. But when they get cold, woe is you. Good luck getting it warm again. So, do you have a crap ton of BTUs? No, you're going to be cold. Like a brick is really hard when it goes sideways. But the point is, even looking at actual runtime, you're going to see variances depending on what the conditions are outside and how long it's been cold and whatnot. So what we're talking about in this slide here, let's say that we're looking at a house where the possible range of heat load is anywhere between 0, which is unlikely, but I had one client, he kept his house at 55 in winter. So he wasn't 0, but he was a hell of a lot lower than I expected. But on the high side, it's 100,000 BTUs. So that's where you are. So if you are guessing at that, a correct guess is basically anywhere between 0 and 100, because there's no way to verify if it's a correct guess. And if you do a man J, that might come in, like if you're really aggressive with all of your assumptions, maybe you can push it down to the 20 or 30,000 range. And on the high side, you're probably going to be pushing that 100. That's the total range. So 20 to 100 for man J. So if you don't know more information about the house, being accurate is extremely difficult. I would argue impossible, frankly. Would anybody else say that it's possible that without a few extra data points beyond just R values and like window glazing, that it's impossible to be that plus or minus 10%?
Well, I wouldn't say impossible because you can get lucky. I mean, you can guess and just so happen to get it right. So, I mean, do you want to be consistent with it? Yes or no? It's impossible to be consistent.
Great. Thank you. That's a really important way to narrow that in. So, I mean, I've seen things vary so much, and I've seen blower doors vary so much. So man J, let's say it's 20 to 100. And then if you learn how to read energy bills and back into what that means for heating and cooling load, let's say that gets you down to like 20 to 40,000. So we're still not to that 10%, but we're getting to where, you know, particularly if you're choosing a heat pump, this is one reason that we like resistance backup. If you put 15 kW in, that's 50,000 BTUs of backup, 51,000 and change, if you're going to be exact. And what is that not going to get you out of trouble on? Like, that's a lot of extra power. So that's a belt and suspenders move, to be frank. So if you're nervous about it, you can always add a little more backup resistance if you've got a heat pump. And furnaces are all too large in our experience with, all is too strong, but darn near. Let's see, say 98% of them are oversized. But so if energy use gets you to say 20 to 40, then you also know energy use blower door, and you do an interview with a client to understand that they, I don't know, heat to 55. I'm sure glad I asked that question, because all of a sudden 800 therms for heating went from, wow, that's pretty low to this house, to holy crap, what a turd this place is. And sure enough, like, it was awful. I was there doing the audit on a like 82-degree day. Wasn't even that warm. I think it was a 3-ton AC. I turned the temperature down. 3 hours later, it hadn't moved. Like, you got to be kidding me. Like, it was just total train wreck thermally. So we just didn't know anything. But what we're doing here is we're taking the spectrum, and we're making the spectrum smaller and smaller and smaller until we get close to that accuracy. So energy use, blower door interview, and understanding something about the house. If you use the right tool, which can take energy use into account, which there's like 2 of them, you can actually get to that plus or minus 10% that you're trying to aim for with a manual S and single stage equipment. But
it's a really nice reconciliation step.
Well, how else are you going to be accurate or know that you're accurate? So I love when people say they're accurate, but it's like, well, I'm really fast. Well, how fast do you run a mile in? It's
fast.
What's fast? Yeah. What's a stopwatch? If you haven't,
how much does the brick weigh?
Yeah. Or it's like a blind golfer saying that they're good when they have no idea where their shots land.
It's like, I'm a really good golfer, but I don't keep score.
Right.
Just trust me, bro. My load calcs are accurate. Of course,
yeah. You know how a lawyer tells you to go. You know how a lawyer tells you to go screw yourself, right? Trust me.
There's nothing much more satisfying than looking at Kajabi charts on design day.
Yeah, yes. I should have thrown a slide in here.
Nothing much more satisfying than being like, oh, look, that, it shuts off for 5 or 10 minutes every hour or so, but pretty much running flat out, and you got hit it.
Yeah. And by the way, on the Kajabi charts, some people ask, like, what's the formula for it? It's not that hard. If you look at it at a design day and it's off 30 minutes for an hour, you're twice as large as you need to be. If it's off for 40 minutes an hour, it's 3 times as large as it needs to be. And that may sound like a lot. It ain't. Especially when you get a house that's even halfway tight. But like, back to the free quote thing, we're not doing blower door tests. We are not recommending doing blower door tests for free. But what we are saying is, at a free quote, you don't know enough to do an accurate load calculation.
The free quote is about helping people understand how wide their load range is based on the information that they have and you have.
And
Like,
we're
this
going to get
is-
to just how we do that in a minute.
It's going to be better than it's way better than a wild ass guess, but you live in the house. So do you have an Kajabi? Let's see the charts.
Yeah, this
Oh,
is
you
also
don't have an
a
Kajabi?
way to
Okay,
tell
well,
them. I can put one in for you. Got one on the truck.
yeah.
And you find out. So another way to look at this, this may or may not be the best slide to have in here, but in the spectrums, what we find is if you disaggregate back to what the actual energy use is for heating and cooling, if the house is tight, you can size to that and get away with it. If the house is loose on the other side, so you can either size to energy use on one side or you can size to manual J on the other, because we have found that manual J is not too crazy far off for leaky houses in cold climates. But we're talking pretty significantly leaky. So this is
So
part
you
of how
roll up to somebody's house and you say, so do you have a crappy house? Because if so, maybe the manual J is good for you.
Exactly. So, but these are the two ends of where you're normally going to see are sizing to energy use, which is something we teach in onboarding. And then on the other side, sizing to man J, because man J, like Jason Trammell mentioned, it has so many fudge factors that, well, in this case, it can still come into less what they have now, but it's still got a lot of fudge factors in there, particularly heating.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't want to call it wrong, but it's wrong. I'm not saying it was aliens, but aliens.
It's just wide. It's just wide.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
There's a lot of places you can size and not like Reedie's story.
Yeah,
You
2 to
can
4
size
tons.
correctly.
How did you tell the software what your assumptions were? And you can vary those and get wildly different answers.
Yeah.
Hasn't it been found too that the choices for infiltration rate can be way off, are not accurate for what a real blower door is?
Yeah, they're
what
too
you may
tight.
classify as leaky isn't leaky enough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how do you adjust for that?
A good old guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why
what
we
is
need
tight?
the real readings. That's why we need energy use to find out how bad it is at worst case.
Yeah. If you're actually going to get close enough to really use manual S, I don't know how you avoid having extra pieces of information. So it's a garbage in, garbage out problem. So in any case, on this little slide here, if you have a leaky house, like a 3-to-1 blower door ratio, so that'd be like a 2,000 square foot house with a 6,000 blower door, which happens in basically all the Midwest cities. Well, like Ted's house, Ted lives in this big up and down rental. He lives upstairs, and but what was your blower door to begin, Ted? Like 10,000, 12,000, something like that.
I think it was under 10, like 9,200 or something.
Okay, still pretty obscene. So that was like a 2-to-1
Yeah.
or something for the house.
Well, it's plaster, so plaster and
yeah.
So it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah,
but
I've seen plenty of 3-to-1s where you see 6, 9, 16,000 CFM 50 numbers. That one blew my doors off.
spray
almost
foaming the
literally.
attic, redefining the attic, changed the whole house hugely.
Yep, top and bottom, baby. It's
Top and
amazing
bottom.
what it does to a house. So if you have one of those leaky houses, you're probably going to want to lean towards what Man J says. If you've got like a 1-to-1 ratio is not crazy. So a 2,000 square foot house with a 2,000 blower door, most track homes since say 1980 are probably going to be somewhere in that ballpark. 1-to-1, 1.5-to-1, something like that. They're not crazy. And that you can size, maybe not quite all the way dead on to energy use, but you can get close. And then if it's genuinely tight, you can probably size really aggressively and get away with it. Like that example I showed earlier, like, would you have guessed that a 1,500 square foot house in Rochester, New York would have a 1.5 ton load? I wouldn't think you would, because I wouldn't have, except for I know Igor, and I know he sealed the thing up, and I knew his blower door. Or like our house in Ohio
And
that we just
he
sold,
tracks
got
with
that
an Kajabi and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, it was the sense that helped us figure that out. The sense energy monitor,
Mm.
and you could see all the defrost cycles, which you don't get that many when it gets that cold.
And
But
he was tracking his radon and
Yep.
paying attention to his like pressurization,
Fresh air.
resolving his radon.
he's. Can you tell he's an engineer?
Yeah, right.
I'm shocking everyone here, but in any case, Man J, it can be okay for older leaky homes, which is kind of what it was originally developed for. And there is Man J for low load homes, which I haven't really played with much.
LL8, baby.
How much have you used that, by the way, Johnny?
No, I'm still working my stripes to get there.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how much uptake there's going to be on that. I really don't. So on Ryan Kerr, jumped in, climb zone 6, 1,650 square feet with full basement. He runs a 1.5 ton. So like it's kind of shocking.
Iowa?
Yeah.
Climate zone 6, huh? Okay.
Yeah, he's on the border of 5 and 6. So Silas is in 5, Ryan is in 6.
Gotcha.
But it's just freaking cold. Ryan, type in what your design temperature is. You're like -5 or something like that. I mean, that's cold. I'm sorry.
That's
just
what that
cold.
does.
Anything below 20 starts getting yes, sir. He said -5 or so, northwest corner of Iowa.
-9.
Doing a 1.5 ton. Like that's crazy. You would never guess that that's the case. But if you don't put in some
Heat pumps don't work below freezing. Oh, that's -9 Fahrenheit.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, design's -9, regularly hit -15. So yeah, that's what you're going to get. Like if your design is one temperature, you're going to break that, but you're only going to break it for a couple hours a year usually, unless you're talking Jonny and cooling. A whole bunch of the country saw upwards of 100 because it was dry at times this year. Yeah, it's Tanner. I remember asking you one day, you're like, "Oh, it's not too bad. It's like 92," and I'm like, "You said keep that cold weather up there. I want you to keep that weather down there." That was some bull crap, but that makes sizing harder too. Like what is the right answer? So even if your calculation is correct, it might still be wrong. There's so many factors that go in this.
So many puzzle pieces. I always say, and we're humans. We're gonna get one wrong. We're gonna miss something. But the more of those puzzle pieces we get control of, the better we can wait for the unexpected things.
Yep. Well, and like you said earlier, John, the variable speed helps out a lot. There's a wider range you can play with.
But that range is meant. Yeah, but that range is meant to be used for load matching, not going, oh, well, what I can do is I'll just oversize a variable speed unit and I'll be fine now.
Yeah, and that's the fight because, again,
Yeah.
it's bad by the client by just giving them a single stage because it's running on low forever.
Oh, yeah.
So it's that fight, that internal fight, definitely.
Yeah.
It's hard. What do we pick? But
not we, it's them now.
Yeah, exactly. That's
yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
See, Johnny, I was trying to put my cape on. You're like, nope, not going to let you do it. You can't be the hero. You got to be the guide. What do you want?
Yeah,
so
because ultimately it's their decision. Like, I mean, some people, they may be like, hey, when it gets really hot outside, if it slides a couple of degrees, oh, well, I don't care. It's only going to last a couple of days or maybe a week at most.
A couple of hours.
I'm more worried about all the other, 360 days.
Yeah.
But then on the contrary, somebody might be like, if it gets 3 degrees above that, like this is unacceptable. And so I'm okay with the other 360 days being not as great, just knowing that it's not going to get out of control. So that's why you let them pick, because different things matter differently to different people.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put in whatever you want, sir or madam. You tell me. I mean, that's it is so strange to spend years learning how to size things well in all kinds of different ways to understand whether you size it correctly or not, and back checking. And it comes down to, what size do you want, sir?
They got to buy the other accessories. They just buy that. If they're gonna try that for more comfort, they got to spend a little bit more money to get the things that the cause and effect of stuff. You know?
Yeah.
Well, and the more we take this responsibility and move it to their shoulders, the better. Because at the end of the day, well, it's like Jeff and I did a ride along with Jeff about 2 months ago, and we went to do a free quote, and they had a 2.5 ton system, just a standard a single speed heat pump, and they were curious about the IRA program, but the only Daikin fit that fits that is the 2 ton for the northern climates. So would you like a 2, 2, or a 2, which is a downsize? But we don't want to take responsibility for that crap. So I asked them, have you noticed it shut off on hot days or cold days? And they said yes. I'm like, okay, so I mean, it's up to you if you want to do it, but that's indicative. You know more about your house than I do as a homeowner. So if we don't have these extra pieces of information to tighten things up, I don't know what the load on your house is. And like, well, you're the expert, you're the professional. Like, it could be somewhere between 1.5 and 6 tons. You know? What size do you want? We can put it in the same size, or if you tell me to do a different size, I can do that. So that is the strangest thing, to spend years learning how to size things really well and deeply understand it, and then be like, yeah, what do you want? But how else do we avoid responsibility? Because if you put in that smaller unit and it doesn't work, they come back on you. Where otherwise, like Jonny, what you were saying, you dropped out on us when they wanted to upsize. They paid to upsize, right?
Yes, they did. And I mean,
So there you go.
My video back, man. Technical difficulties. Sorry, but
You got to get home, buddy.
Yeah. So what happened with that one, is I gave them 3 selections, almost let's say good, better, best, single, 2, and then the variable capacity. And the one that they wanted, the sensible latent ratio was like 85%, something like that. So it made it like to 101%. It was really close to the sensible, like right on the money. And I was like, all right, cool. I got my sensible taken care of. That's awesome. Now, if they went with the variable capacity, it would have been a multi-head Mitsubishi system. So I had to oversize, and then it adjusted the capacity per head or per indoor unit.
Yeah.
So when the homeowner, they're like, we want to spend our money more on this kitchen area here, and they chose to spend the budget for the kitchen, and then 1 year went by and it slipped. And like, man, I really wish I could get my house to 72. And I'm like, well, you can when at nighttime, and it just really, they had the way they lived. They had 2 teenage boys. They had a pool that opened up a lot to the outside. So the house wasn't, but it was tight because we did a blower door at rough and we got, I think, 2 air changes per hour. It was tight.
That's pretty tight. Yeah.
And sorry to use that word, guys, but just so we can be on the same level. And, I just didn't account for teenage boys, leaving the big glass sliding door open, the Xbox, all this other stuff that I'm like, crap. I kept my mind in the bubble of what John thought of a superhero, following the code of how I'm supposed to do stuff. And I forgot about how the homeowner lives. And that was important. That was like a light bulb moment, like, shit.
Right.
I should talk to the homeowner more instead of just running everything through the builder and doing what John wants to do to code and as tight as I could.
Yeah, it can be challenging. I had a good friend in Florida, went down to see them in the Tampa area, and he kept telling me what his energy bills were, and I'm like, they should not be anywhere near that. And I get down there, and they have a bunch of cats. They have for years, and they leave the door open for like 6 hours in the morning, so the cats can run in and out. And then he's got a bunch of computers, which I know he's an IT guy, but his computers added enough load that it definitely drove his usage up. But yeah, he was pretty tight. He was better than a 1-to-1. He was in that 2 ACH 50, John. Look, I said it.
Dang it.
But that usually works out to like a 0.75 to 1 ratio of
Yeah.
CFM
Well,
50 per square foot.
Yeah, probably like 0.4. It's down there.
Yeah, it's tight. Yeah, there's other things you don't know. So that, I mean, do we have any way of collecting enough information for free that can get us accurate on loads?
No.
Like Ken said, the electric usage that HVAC 2.0 does, that is like another checks and balance I saw for it.
Yep. Yeah. Checking past energy use is key, but I don't want to go disaggregate somebody's bills for free.
Yeah,
Mm.
true. Yeah,
I'm going to load all that in there. That's not a free service. Like, you wanted a free quote. So
You give me a specification and I build a quote. That's a free quote.
You got it.
Yeah, exactly. You tell me what you want.
And by the way, you probably want apples to apples when you're getting free quotes from people so that they all are the same, right? So you need to get a specification. You need to get a design. If you're going to build a house, you need to go pay an architect to put your drawings together. And then you take those drawings to builders and they'll build to the drawing. No, that's if somebody's going to come paint your house, you're going to give them a specification. Yeah, I want you to do a primer coat and 2 finish coats and do the trim and this and
Yep. But
You're
not the shed.
professional. The professional should know what color I want.
Up to my wife.
and you should know that I want 2 coats of paint, not 1, plus primer. Yeah, they have a funny thing. Like, buying HVAC is unique in consumer experience because they don't know anything about the equipment to speak of. They don't know what size they want. They don't know what other things need to go in there. Your return drop is tiny, and I can hear your system screaming. But your cheap guy is going to leave that there with a 1-inch filter. So you better have an apples to apples quote for, you can get a piece of crap, but when the fan motor fails in 18 months, don't call me crying. It's going to be, $1,500 or $2,000 to change it out. And guess what? In 18 months, we get to do it again. That's a challenging thing. So anyway, back to sizing. Want to put a bell curve in everyone's mind. So you're used to that, up and over. And it's a really good statistical tool for understanding where different things will land. So if you go 1 standard deviation from the midpoint, so if you think of the loads where, say that 0 to 100, your midpoint's 50,000, 34% of homes would, in theory, be within 1 standard deviation, or say plus or minus like 15 or 20,000 BTUs on either side of that 50. And then you'd have another 13% that would be either quite high or quite low. And then you have a few more that are way off on the bottom or way off on the top. It's crazy tight or crazy loose. So this is one way to think of loads. And so if you have a newer home, you may be able to size towards the lower side of the bell curve. And if you have an older home, you may be able to size towards the upper end of that bell curve. So if you're this is thinking about same size homes in the same climate. So, Ken, Athens, Ohio, Tanner, Birmingham, or however the hell you say Birmingham there. I'm more used to the British pronunciation than I am the Alabama one.
Your red coat.
They're Northerners.
Damn Yankees. I had a great Texan client. I loved him to pieces back when I was working for my dad. And he would call in, and one day he's like, I'm looking for my favorite Yankee. And my dad spent some time in Oklahoma, and he's like, Bill, you're not supposed to have one of those. So it was fun. Dallas, Texas, man, what a great guy. But anyway, this is one way to think of loads. So for a given size home in a given place, you're going to have a bell curve. Now, one thing to mess with your heads, though, sometimes you may find that these bell curves skew to the low side or skew to the high side. So it's not always going to be a perfect bell like this. But what we're thinking about in doing this is like, so that first slide that I showed with 18,000 BTUs being actual at Igor's house and 70,000 being the high end Man J. That's where our bell curve is basically. So that would be from the bottom here, 2 standard deviations out to the high, 2 standard deviations out the other way. So it's not going to cover every single house, but it should cover, about 90% of existing homes. So you can run some really basic load calcs, really, really basic, and you can come up with these ranges. And we call it the likely load range. So this is one way to talk to clients about, what size equipment do you need? So for Igor's house, which is what I had in mind here, likely load range between 20,000 and 70,000 BTUs. But you have a 90,000 BTU furnace presently.
So if
I'm
you're
not gonna
happy
tell you
with
what to do.
that, if you're happy with that and want to replace it with that, go for it. Just it's
Okay.
outside of the likely load range.
Yep. And like this likely load range doesn't cover everything. This is the majority of the bell curve, but it's not the whole thing. You get your really low and your really high. Your 55-degree freaking set point. That's the only time I ever heard a set point that low. I've heard 65, but I've never heard 55. Just
I don't
that
know
one
how
guy.
people do it. I ran into a guy who had it down 50 to 55. That is just doing
And
some weird
trouble
stuff.
with those guys too. One time I did the energy usage off of it, and the lady, I didn't interview her right, and I didn't know she kept her house at like 60. So the gas furnace never ran really in Austin.
Yeah.
Oh man, it threw me off so bad. I was like, wow, But luckily we sized for cooling and the heating rose with it. But it could mess you up if they do that.
I'm sure glad I asked that question, and it's in both the Comfort Consult and the free quote questionnaires, because you want to know that some people do weird stuff, or maybe they don't tell you that, but at least if you ask them and you document their answer, you're in good shape. But this is a different way to look at it, because like we talked about early on, like a manual J, Reedie, 2 to 4 tons, 3 different people, 3 different answers. Like you can make it do whatever you want. Tanner, when we did the game house, I asked you to change a whole bunch of assumptions, and we came up with a heat load of 11,000 on an 800 square foot house in West Virginia, because I wanted to be crazy aggressive. That was basically ignoring the basement / garage, but reality turned out to be like 15 or 16. Fine.
Yeah.
Do you remember what that house came in when you just put in basic info and didn't change anything?
It was over what it actually was. I can't remember exactly. I want to say it was around 25.
Yeah.
Or so. But that was also kind of just there were some default things that hadn't been adjusted, such as blower door and things like that at that point. Which also, granted, the software I was using, which was Quick Model, I have found that it comes in a lot lower and it is a lot more aggressive than, say, like Cool Calc. Because I've seen instances with Cool Calc, like my parents' house, because I know this for a fact, because I did a capacity test when it was literally 25, 20 degrees outside, and I had an Ecobee installed, watching runtimes. Like, I knew exactly what it was doing. And according to Cool Calc, that house was supposed to be like 36,000 to 42,000 BTUs, roughly, depending on how you adjust the blower door. In reality, it was right at 2 ton. And I mean, that was a 2,200 square foot house. Yeah, so it's drastically off. And
Yeah,
which that was Cool Calc.
About 8,000 off from Elite to Quick Model.
Yeah. And then when I go to Quick Model, which actually I haven't did that house in Quick Model, I've just noticed when I do Quick Model and Cool Calc at the same time, the heating side in particular is like way off. Just because in my area, really, heating and cooling should be pretty similar unless the house is just terrible. And Cool Calc is always like about double heating what the cooling is. And so it's just, and it's one of those things that, certain softwares, they're going to kind of lean towards certain things for fudge factor because, for whatever reason, everybody's just terrified of not having enough for some reason.
Ryan's
like to
busting
know-
your chops.
I'd be curious to know if after Reedie's experience with the court or the board, and they found that between 3 different load calculations, there was no conclusion to be made. Will that affect any of their future decisions? I mean, you've got to turn in a load calculation for a job, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
So they just say, okay, here's another one, and there's no point checking it because you can't.
Yeah, I think it's just meeting some obtuse
Bureaucratic.
requirement.
Yeah.
Well, the
Absurdity.
municipalities are trying to catch up. I mean, they got inspectors in there that are trying to catch up, and HVAC is just, we're trailing behind the building industry, and they're catching up, and they're putting now all these safeguards up. Like, hey, you got to get a manual J. In Austin and my surrounding counties, now they're making them do a manual S. And so they're like, they're freaking out. And now they're finding the easy button on manual S. Like for Elite, you could just press the easy button, click, click. And it's like, it's a 75% sensible, 25% latent. And I'm following other designers. I'm like, they're doing that crap, And now they're slowly trickling in manual D. So the municipalities and the codes are catching up by making them turn in these things with the plans before the building even going up. And so many people freaking out, and so many people are throwing shitty loads out. Like they will.
You don't get paid. What do you expect?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the guys that are getting paid, I'm seeing designers getting paid, and they're doing a manual J, but doing a bunch of placeholders. So, for example, windows in my climate zone, I think it's 0.4 U value, 0.25 solar heat gain coefficient. And so they're just putting those in, and then the real windows in the field are like 0.23 U value, 0.23 solar heat gain. And so the heating is way off now, Infiltration, they're putting average across the board. Or they just don't know what they're putting, and that's
nobody knows what to put that crap in. Yeah, it's garbage in, garbage out can be the problem. So Ryan's asking, is that new construction only, Johnny?
I would say in new construction you get tested, but if I walk across a builder and I'm asking them to fill out my specification sheet for my calculations, and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing with the walls. We're gonna put insulation. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Right there, I'm gonna make them go to code because I can't make that up. You know what I mean? And if they're gonna do something, I'm not gonna tell them what to do. But in theory, if we're all gonna do something, we got to do it at least to the minimum code. Like I don't even think you can find windows like that unless you really shop at like not Harbor Freight, like I don't know. Harbor Freight. I'm trying to think.
Oh, they sell windows now? Sweet.
Yeah. But like Habitat for Humanity and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Where you can buy used windows or stuff, but it catches you, man. Like it really, like even the zip board. Are they doing zip boards? Some people might look at it and won't know that it has a continuous thermal barrier around it.
Yep.
They're like, what the hell is that?
Load.
That all these little things shift, and so. What I'm seeing out there, and even my load, if I do a load for you my first time, man, I hope you find mistakes because it's my first time I did the load. I'm usually running my load calculations probably 3 times at a job, and right there in the beginning, and then when we're doing the rough, I'm like, oh yeah, all the windows are right. Okay, boom, we got the sizes are good, everything matches up, and then at the end, once I know the final blower door. And make sure nothing changed, I can actually put those real numbers in, and now I'm getting in there now, and then follow it by the energy usage a year later and the eco beat. Now you know what's up.
Yeah,
and so we have a high level of confidence that everybody on the inspection side is doing their job thoroughly too.
Oh yeah. Tanner?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, you're actually using the software like it really should be used, because it's kind of funny that load calc software is kind of thought of this: you put in information and then it's going to magically know exactly what kind of house you have, exactly where it's at, and it's going to tell you exactly the number to the BTU what it needs. When in reality, all you're doing is you're just running some basic math. It's kind of simulating what it thinks a house is going to do within the parameters that you're saying, and then it's going to tell you what it thinks is going to happen. And so any other field, they take that and they go, okay, here's rendition 1. Here's what it says. Now, what's off? What do we need to tweak? What if we do this? What if we do that? And you play with it to kind of get an idea of, you're simulating what is likely to happen, so you can get an idea, and then you make assumptions off of those ideas, and you try to hone in from there. You don't just go version 1, 42,000 BTUs for cooling. Bam, we're just going to ride with that. Yeah.
Well, you got it's more.
I'm looking at. I'm sorry. I'm looking at Ryan's comment. I would assume that whatever load calculation they did was for a single unit, and then they just applied that to everything, whether it was a center unit, a downstairs or an upstairs unit, an end unit, an individual unit. A single load calc applied to every single one.
Oh, heck
Without regard to where the sun is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
4-ton Mike are us.
And they
Yeah,
let
so
that fly. They let it
Ryan
fly.
commented he has a set of prints for a 27-unit condoplex that was signed off by a mechanical engineer, each ranging between 2,100 and 3,000 square feet, all spec'd for 100K furnaces and split between 4 and 5-ton ACs. Jeff, it's 4-ton Mike. Come back to life in Iowa. Holy
Sounds good to
cow.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the shared walls, like I learned that one, sort of the hard way. It's okay. But pulled out a 70,000 BTU furnace that never ran in a 1,250 square foot end unit, and put in a 2-ton green speed, which was still horribly oversized. It's like, oh man, you got to be kidding me. I couldn't believe that we oversized it that badly. But she had a little bit
stage
lower.
was kind of new at that time, I think. Did we even know about it?
The what?
5-stage.
Yeah, we did. I offered it, and she messed with my mind, because that was a 90,000 square foot condo that she chose like a $25,000 package for. She got a heat pump water heater. We did some duct revisions. She got a green speed, and then I did some air sealing as well. And I was just like, wait a minute, you just spent upwards of 25% of the value of your home on this. And I should have aimed her at the 5-stage, because that would have been a better solution for that house. Its low temperature output isn't as good, and it could dip to 25%, where the old 2-stage green speed only dropped to 55% of full output, because it was actually a derated 3-ton is what it was. But yeah, that was wrong. And I learned that because of shared freaking walls.
And that happens in new construction a lot. Like when I talked to one of a big track builder, and I said, I was he had a problem house, so I knew the guy. We went out there. And I was like, all right, let me see your calculation. And he's like, it's one of these 5. And I was like, one of these 5? He goes, yeah, there's only like 5 different kind of buildings in this neighborhood. I'll just pick the one. And I'm like, nothing matches up. And then he goes, yeah, well, what we do is our software allows us to rotate the house, and we just select the house in the worst scenario. And then that goes for all of them, so we know we don't. And so, there was more than just oversized. Ductwork was messed up too, but that's the common thing in track home building, man. That's just, that's what plays. And they can
At least you're likely to get oversized ductwork.
Oh, they won't get that's a whole other problem.
Doing S curves and 180s with that thing. I mean, they're setting up a little racetrack for that air to go through. So Jason Trammell commented, almost everyone in HVAC uses 500 to 600 square foot a ton, whether the structure is 100 years old with no improvements or 2023 with complete spray foam. Yeah, heck, we hear 400 and every so often 300.
And what we call those people are stupid.
Here's your sign.
worse. We're gonna sell them whatever we have in the shop.
Yeah.
It's a,
We're gonna clear out
Tanner,
our stock.
Tanner, you love doing those memes to mess with people. And like really early on, you created one of those change my mind things of 10 kids secretly sizes at 400 square feet a ton. Changed my mind. And we all just about died laughing on that one.
Yeah. I talked to the owner of one of the supply houses in town, and they, wow, probably 40 years ago that they were, when they opened up, and their provider told them the only thing you need to stock is 100,000 BTU furnaces and 3-ton air conditioners. Don't have anything else.
That's all you need.
Don't have anything else. And 6-inch for everything.
Yeah. If it's a big room, you put in 2.
By the way, Tanner, I want to go back to Quick Model for a second. I suspect I know part of why that comes in lower. And the reason is probably a guy named Danny Parker, who's a researcher at Florida Solar Energy Center, because Quick Model is based on energy gauge, which is it's Man-J compliance. But there's got to, I've read the book.
Man-J with some balls.
Was what?
It says Man-J with some balls.
It is, yeah, exactly. It's a little bit gutsy, but there's the ranges within Man-J on some things that you can choose, and I think it chooses on the bottom end of just about everything, where other software chooses in the middle of the top. Because Calcs is usually more aggressive than some other ones that I've seen, and then a Quick Model can be better. But Danny. Years ago, it was hilarious, honestly. So there's this guy that Ted and I don't particularly like named Michael Blaznik, who does a whole bunch of research, but oftentimes you can tell that he comes to his conclusions and then bends the numbers to back those up. So he said there's no way that you can actually predict energy usage or load well. And the same week at a different conference, Danny Parker is giving a presentation on how he predicted energy use within 1.5 to 2%. Like
Somebody
you
should tell
can't
him.
any closer than that.
Somebody should tell him he's wrong. He's like, don't you know you can't do that?
He also said thermostats save energy, measurable energy, and then he did a study in Colorado, I think.
Yeah.
And the way they arrived at thermostats save energy is they did all these projects on the houses, and then they negotiated how to split the energy savings.
Yeah. They're like, well, there's this $100 that we aren't 100% sure where it is. So we're going to say that 25 of it's stat.
Yeah. And then that's what the number was, is this he's like, yeah, thermostats save between $25 and $30 a year. And you're like, wait, like, why are we even arguing then? Like for 25 or 30. Oh, I thought like the impression that everybody gets is that you're going to be able to put one of your kids through college on the thermostat savings. And then at the end, it's like the punchline, $25 to $30 a year. Holy
man, it costs that to go to McDonald's and Taco Bell now. No joke.
Yeah.
Hey, where can I get one of those thermostats?
Can I have 10 of them? Then I'll save 250, right?
New York gives them away free, I think.
I get 2 kids, so I need 2 college tuitions.
Well, you see, actually, you already have one. You just don't know it. What you have to do is you just go up to the thermostat on the wall and you just take it off the wall. And as long as you leave it off the wall, you're going to save so much energy. I guarantee it.
Perfect.
Right. Well, just kind of bringing it back. Got to put that back in. Without knowing extra info, being anywhere near close enough to accurate to be like that plus or minus 10 or 20 or even 30% for Man-S, you may be able to do it out of luck, but consistency, probably not going to happen. Anybody who's done a whole lot of blower door testing has found real surprises. I found old houses that were super tight, and I found new houses that were super loose. And infiltration is a huge factor in there. So a better way in our minds to help clients understand this is to have a really basic calculation, which we call likely load range, that shows what a house of a certain size in a certain climate could be from bottom to top on both heating and cooling. And this, we have the formulas all worked out. We just have to build it into the software. But very shortly, all you're going to need to do is put in the square footage, which is one of the questions, the zip code, which you've already filled out, whether it's 1 story or 2, and then what kind of primary foundation it has, be that a basement, a crawl space, or slab. And that's going to give you a bottom and top. And then you can ask your client, like, so here's where it probably is. What would you like? And then you can offer another service for actual sizing if you want, because you can get close. I surprised even myself over the winter, and all I had was really energy for a client in Maryland, and I got within 1,500 BTUs on heating. That's not half bad. So I actually hit that 10%.
Wow.
He was waffling between a 3-ton and a 3.5, and I walked him all the way down to potentially a 1.5 with resistance. And I'm like, so but you know, if you're nervous, you could do the 2 or the 2.5. That's fine. And the 2.5 Mitsubishi happens to be it's kind of a ringer unit. It's got a wider range and better output on a couple of different things. So he ended up doing the 2.5 because his HVAC contractor was terrified of the 2, or God forbid the 1.5. And we watched what the output was and what the outdoor temperature was, and it was within 1,500 BTUs. So we were pretty happy with that. It was like 27 is what it came out to be. And the 1.5 tons, that may sound crazy, but with 5 kW of backup heat, that's another 17,000. And he's in DC, so he wanted better cooling. And I'm like, let's size it to cooling and make up with your strip if you want to. But I love messing with clients doing that. Now, they're not always, you don't always hit that close to the pin. That was a good one. But pretty routinely, like Jonny Nigro's house with treat, it came in at, what is it? It's pushing a 50,000 man J. When we backed all the fudge factors out, it was like 32 or 35, something like that. And there was if we just looked at the load for the first and the second floors, it was 27. And we watched that 3-ton heat pump run, and it lost the war at 27,000. But Man J was double that. So most people would have put a furnace in that house. It had an 80K. Most people would have done the 80 or maybe a 60. But the key thing is you can't know. You just can't. So give people a range and let them choose. Mess with their minds a little bit. Tanner, you are oddly quiet, man.
I'm sorry about that. I ran out of insults.
Well, we also ran out of time. Are there any more slides, or was there any more to discuss?
There's another topic, but we'll just push that to next week or the week after.
Okay, so in looking at this likely load range, I think to sort of circle back, the width of the range is a function of risk. And
Yes.
that's what you want to have a conversation with the homeowner about, and have them understand that it's never going to be a point. It's always going to be a range, but you can narrow it.
Yes.
And you can probably narrow it down to 0.5 ton.
Yeah.
And that means that you can really get great performing equipment that fits your needs.
And that's where you can ask them, say, hey, do you feel more comfortable being on the lower end or being on the higher end? What makes you more comfortable? And let them
right.
pick.
And then you can bring up the static pressure thing and say, by the way, for, you know, if you're measuring static pressure for $25, I can tell you what your risk is of if you take the higher end versus the lower end.
There's one more important thing talking about ranges. HVAC operates off of ranges. The voltage range is in the 190s up to 250. The capacitor range is plus or minus 10%. Airflow is all over the place. Temperatures, set points are all over the place. We had to ask ourselves, if we're against a range, a likely load range, then why aren't we that way in everything else we do with HVAC? Charging even has a range. There's no absolutes in HVAC, not one absolute. And so the problem really lies not with anybody but the contractor who's doing the load calculation and saying it's exact when it's really not. It's almost as if they know that they're not telling the truth, but they're going to do it anyways just to cover themselves.
Or to make themselves look like they're some kind of a magician or
Right.
more professional than they are. Or
Right. It's a
yeah.
range. It's a range. Everything in HVAC is a range. And if we're professionals in servicing and fixing and all this other stuff, then we should also be, and that's professional to have a range.
Well, it's professional to have humility.
Right. We should be equally professional in having a range unless we're going to do the things that are necessary to tighten that range up really, really tight.
Very good point. Very good point.
That's a great way to end, gents.
Thank you, guys. Shall we go to the after party?
Away we go. See you all over there. And
Thank you, everybody
for coming.
that came. Please come back next week and leave comments and likes if you're on YouTube. Subscribe. And
great. Well, we got Jason Trammell here. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Is heating and cooling
Thank you, Jay.
services. So he came in. I think he started his own account. So that we could actually call him by the right name instead of Heating and Cooling Services Incorporated every time. Ryan Kerr, thanks for coming. Tom Leck, thanks for coming. Yeah, everyone else, appreciate having you here.
And if you haven't looked at the 19-minute video with Nate and Jeff, where they go through the free quote, that's at our channel. And if you haven't looked at the interview I did with Austin after he did his first free quote, please check that out. Both of them are 19 minutes. And if you listen to them at 1.5 times speed, they're only 12 minutes.
There you go. And we'll add those to the comments in this video. All right. Thanks, everybody.
On the other side.
See you later.
Next week.
Good night,
Everybody.
guys.
Good night.